the policy paper that we would talk about during this panel. So if anybody from you hasn't taken it yet, it's free here, so you can just take it. I will exactly just pass it over. Maybe as our last panelist is on his way, and it's all my fault because we have a small change in the program and he still knew that it is 2:15, so it's not his fault but my fault, and I apologize, as two keynote speakers should be here, but there was only one. We just changed it a little bit, so please don't be it's not his fault, so if somebody is to blame, it's me. But nevertheless, I would like to welcome you very warmly here after the lunch break. I hope you enjoyed the first part of the conference, and I must say it's a great pleasure to see all of you here, because it's always said that during the lunch break the conference room is not so overcrowded as at the beginning, and I'm happy that nearly no chairs are empty. So welcome, and I hope, as we're planning this panel, we hope to have one subject that is more concentrate on one field, and I think online media are such a field that we still don't know so much. We know something is being discussed, but I hope during this panel we can concentrate more. And that's why we invited great speakers coming from the countries where really the online media plays a role, and that's the main question of this panel. If it's really like that the online media are so important in the countries where the democracy still needs support, if it's really like that they used to play or still play a role when any movements, any actions are organized. So there are the questions that we will concentrate on, and after Iryna and Basem, who I will introduce in a minute, will describe the situation in their countries, I will also would like to involve all of you in creating some conclusions and recommendations. Happy to have you here. I already said that it's my fault, so you shouldn't be sorry. So now I have all my great panelists and authors of our policy brief that we written. Let me explain the concept of the policy briefs that were prepared here. We would not just describe the policy briefs here. We would like to have it just for you and as an input to the discussion. So I would ask my panelists to have their comments, and you can then read more in the policy paper. So as I said, during the last month, as I was reading, observing what kind of discussions are running in the media, we can see two, let's say, streamings, right? That first of all, that the online media, Facebook, Twitter, are so important, that they help so much to support democracy, that they help so much during the revolutions in Egypt. And on the other hand, we can hear a lot of people saying, well, actually, that's only the regime that can use the online media. It's quite dangerous for the oppositionists. It's dangerous to use Twitter or Facebook, and you put too many information. Or actually, it's not the online media that help, but for people on the streets. So they are the questions that we would like to ask. As many of you probably have heard about the famous book of Evgeny Morozov, who claimed that, well, actually, using online media might be more dangerous even for the people fighting for democracy as useful. I would like that we all bear it in mind during our discussion, and that we all together at the end formulate some recommendations what we think tankers, we media experts, we journalists and NGOs can do together to use this tool, online media tool, to support democracy. So let me first introduce my panelists. On my left is Iryna Vidanava from Belarus, editor-in-chief, 34 Multimedia magazine, an expert on online media issues, and she will describe us the landscape in Belarus when it comes to using online media and using the online media not only by the oppositionists but also by the regime. Then she will be followed by Basem, Fathy, who came from Egypt. As you all know, it's not so easy now to come from Cairo to Warsaw, so we really appreciate that you found the way here, and you are not in Cairo but with us to share your experience. So I hope you can just share with us what's happening right now in Cairo, of course concentrating on online media, but also give us a little bit the overview of the atmosphere in your city. Then on my right, Rodger Potocki from National Endowment for Democracy. So his perspective will be more from the donor perspective. He works a lot with NGOs, experts in many countries, so he would have this general overview and not only case studies but some general overview how it works in different countries with online media. And last but definitely not least, our Institute of Public Affairs expert and an author of the study that we present here, Alek Tarkowski, who also works with not only with us but as an expert on online media in many other projects in Poland, and he wrote this paper and will try to conclude as well the results of the studies that done for us for this paper. So okay, without any more introduction, I would like to ask the first question to Iryna and Basem, maybe starting with Iryna. How it is, because when we think about Belarus, we have already discussed it during the first panels, democracy movements need to be supported, but are the online media really the good tool to support democracy in your country, or is it rather like that the regime still uses the online media also so much that it's more dangerous for the experts or NGOs to use online media? How does it work in your country?
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us, and I'm happy also to see that in the audience we have young faces, which is anticipated, but also some older generation which are young in their hearts, I believe. But we all use new technology to some extent, and I think that's why this section actually is appealing to most of the people who are attending the conference. Well, Agnieszka mentioned Evgeny Morozov, who is coming from Belarus, and we were actually doing a lot of things together online in the media activism field. But I would still try to argue, as somebody who is working in Belarus and being both an analyst but mainly practitioner of the new media, that it is possible, useful, and neat to use new media, and I will try to show that actually this is something that is optimistic coming from Belarus these days rather than the usual pessimistic story. I would say that for the last year, if you are looking for some success stories of the last pretty grim year in Belarus, I would point independent media, first of all new media, online media, and human rights activist work. And I will try to make the case for the online media. A few years ago, it actually seemed and felt like Lukashenko almost achieved his goal to shut down independent media altogether, or at least to squeeze them to a very small, narrow ghetto where they would only reach out to those who already support democratic changes but would not reach out to the broader audience. What the regime did not anticipate is that tough repressions can actually bring up even more creativity inside of the independent media, which happened. Moreover, when creativity couples with new technology, they can not only challenge the information monopoly of the state, but also the regime itself. and that's what we are observing in Belarus these days. When the authorities realized the impact and the scale of the new media, new technologies, it was already too late for them to seize this open up field and to try to catch up with that and control it fully, and they're still losing the information war online. When in November 2005, the KGB seized, confiscated the last print issue of my magazine, 1 month later, we came up as a multimedia magazine published on compact discs. First, because there was no way for us to continue in print as a traditional media. Second, because we saw and knew that the future will be in the new media field and we wanted to follow, but on compact discs, because in January 2006, when we published the first multimedia issue, internet was really slow, very expensive, and there were more people with computers than with internet. What we have today, we have the daily audience of 8 independent leading news websites of the same size as a daily audience of one of the most popular state TV channels, which means that we are competing for a huge audience, because this daily audience that I mentioned is about 600,000 people. It's a huge piece of population daily consuming information, independent, objective information online. There are 3.6 million internet users in Belarus, and over 60% are using the internet on a daily basis. It's huge for a small country. If the internet audience in 2010 in general in Belarus grew by 18%, the audience of the news websites, and they're mostly independent news websites, grew by 82%. So what we also see that society actually seeks and wants this independent information, and they're looking for it online. As one of my colleagues put it recently, that when something happens in Belarus, people don't turn on TV now, they go online, and then they share the news with their neighbors or the others who don't have access to internet. 8 out of top 10 online media in Belarusian internet are independent. It also means that the state is trying to create media online. They're trying to squeeze into this space, but they're losing this war because they're not interesting for people who are coming online. What the new technologies can do, they definitely can be a very powerful information tool, and I try to make a case for that. They are definitely a very good tool for self-organizing and for mobilizing people. And there are examples in the report about what happened in the last year. The tools are changing. In 2006, the main mobilizing, organizing tool was LiveJournal, the big blogging platform. In 2010, 2011, we are talking about the Russian and Alek of Facebook, which is Potocki, and Facebook itself, its audience is actually much bigger now than in this report. It's reaching 600,000 people in Belarus. People also react by creating some new things online when something happens. When the foreign currency suddenly disappeared in all exchange points in Belarus at some point this year, then immediately a new website was created by media activists, which was called after the name of the ex-head of the National Bank, Prokopovich, which they created a biggest virtual exchange point online. There were hundreds and thousands of deals made by people making deals about the exchange rate of how much they want to buy dollars for or sell dollars for, and then people would meet offline and do the actual deal there. But the online platform actually challenged the entire system in the country, and the authorities could do nothing with that. There was a DOS attack on this resource at some point, but they recovered next day, and the business continued. Of course, there are also examples of self-organization, mobilization of people. There was one successful example when through Potocki network, the petrol strike was organized, when hundreds of cars blocked the main avenue and actually forced the authorities to again reduce the price for petrol after the increase. That sparkled the whole series of protests, which are now known as Silent Revolution, which was also organized through the online community of Potocki called Revolutions from Social Networks. Of course, social media create the space for debates, for deliberation. I would say that it's a cyber kitchen. In the Soviet times, our parents were sitting in the kitchens talking to each other, conspiring and cooking the revolutions. And what we do now, we do it all online. And that's, of course, possible to track down, of course, possible to persecute the activists who are sparkling those discussions, but it's impossible to fully shut it down. And that's also a very important role of the new media. I would also say that this feeling that you can share your thoughts more or less openly in the countries like Belarus, online, gives a feeling of solidarity, gives a feeling that there are more people out there who are not satisfied with the situation, gives a feeling of belonging to a broader community, which is extremely important in the countries where people are afraid, where people feel alone, when they don't know where to go if they have a problem. What new technology cannot do? It cannot replace the real-life activism. Technology is the means, it's not the end in itself. And that's a big mistake to expect that if you set up social networks and make them available on internet to all the people, suddenly things will change. They will not. There was a group called Angels, which formed online on December 19th in the night. They called for solidarity. They called for people to help those hundreds of people who were arrested and beaten up and put in prison. But it was real people, real angels, who actually got together to collect and to deliver the money and the goods that also real people came to bring to those points of collection. So it's a combination of online activism, online tools with real life activism, which brings real change and real result. Technology and new media tools cannot be effective if there is no message, if there is no strategy, if there is no objective to achieve. Especially when the regime, like in Belarus, uses really brutal force against peaceful demonstrators, against peaceful activists, and online activists as well. And that's what we actually observed in the summer. After the sparkle of silent protest and this excitement of the moment when it felt like we are almost in Egypt, suddenly it all disappeared. And it disappeared because the police started beating up people just for uploading on the streets, because people lost enthusiasm since they didn't see what for they're coming out. If there is this goal for which you risk whatever you have and you achieve so little with that, then of course there is a big disappointment following. So that's also crucial, that there is a goal to achieve, a message to send with whatever you organize online. The new technologies are getting more and more popular using them, but still, whether it's Belarus or Egypt or even the United States, we are talking about internet covering a certain segment of society, but not the entire society. And therefore, we are talking mostly about young and urban population rather than older rural population. Therefore, it's important to combine different tools when we are talking about supporting democracy or promoting democracy. And therefore, I would call for countries like Belarus, we have to keep up everybody active going, whether we are talking about online activism or offline activism, new media or traditional media or some of that. And that's also crucial that the support goes to different groups to diversify them rather than focusing on a trendy or fashion thing like online media, even though, of course, I claim for it as one of the representatives. To the second part of the question, there are lots of things that bad guys and dictators can do using or misusing online media. There are or can be restrictive and repressive laws which would regulate and control internet. They harass cyber activists. They block and organize DOS attacks on the websites and social networks. They closely monitor cyberspace. They seed fear among the users of the internet, and we often feel that everybody is watched in Belarus, whether online or offline. We call people, there is a special term for those who are working, who are on duty online, we call them trolls. Those are the people who are commenting nasty things on the independent websites. So I would say that all of these that I mentioned is happening in Belarus, and you can read about this in the report, we can talk about it more, but I wouldn't go to the details of that, because the main point is that to each action there is a counteraction. And if there are tools for the authorities to control, to monitor, to harass cyber activists, then there are tools which are actually helping to stop them from doing it, which allow to go around the controlling and blockage and so on. the restrictive regimes lose against creativity of the online activists and real-life activists. For example, when news websites were hacked and put down on the election day on December 19th, the independent websites editorial switched to the social network communities, and they were keeping informing the public by using their communities which were created beforehand. So being one step ahead is another strategy, and that is pretty successful in Belarus to my knowledge. Authorities also should deal with the fact that most of the people still are coming online not for political information, not for information even, but more for entertainment. And that's why they have to think twice before blocking, for example, Vkontakte in Belarus. 2.5 million of Belarusians using Vkontakte for writing about cats against a couple of hundreds of people on the streets uploading. You'd think twice, do you want to really piss off 2.5 million or allow the 200 people together? Well, of course, it's a dangerous game, and the regimes understand it very well, because from 200 you can go to 2,000 and more. That's how revolution sparkles around. But again, as for the moment, in Belarus, the authorities have to be smart about it, what they're doing, and they actually don't block it on the huge scale. In small and authoritarian countries like Belarus, the regime still believes more in applying brutal force against more sophisticated and more expensive technology. Probably Evgeny is right in his book saying that, well, they can employ lots of programmers, they can actually buy people in and control everyone. In countries like Belarus, there is no resource for that. Of course, they're doing something, but they can't really cover everything. And sometimes it's much easier just to come to the office, confiscate entire equipment, and go away with the computers, and that's to stop people from doing whatever they're doing online, then come up with a very sophisticated technology how to track them down. I would also say that the regime doesn't actually create anything new in the media field, in online field. They are trying to jump into the last car of the train which is already leaving. They lost the momentum, actually. What they're trying to do, they're trying to shut down, they're trying to control, they're trying to use new technologies to stop us from using new technologies for bringing changes. But they really, at the moment in Belarus, and I hope it will continue, are not capable of reaching the level which the independent democratic forces actually reached already. My probably last comment would be that the new technologies, of course, make information more open and more trackable, which means that they can also make the activists more vulnerable. And that means that we all should learn how to be smart online, how to think what we are doing online, what it can lead to. We should gain certain knowledge and skills and caution about what we are doing. But again, the new media field is such a new field that we are learning by doing, and both sides, the good side and the bad side, are sharing best cases and successes and worst case scenarios. They're learning from each other, and I hope that in this race the activists, pro-democratic forces will be still faster than the bad guys. And for those of you who are concerned about security online, who are working in restrictive societies, I have a little hint here on useful tips on how to stay safe online. Those are basic things. Those are safety cards. Both are in two languages, English and in Russian. So to keep in mind that if you want to stay safe online, the safety should go from both ends. So I have a few copies, and if you want to get one, I'll give one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if anybody is interested, then please come to Iryna. I think we should all read it, not only when we live in Belarus or Egypt, but also in Poland, in Hungary or France. I think to know how to use internet, it would be a good hint. After Basem, actually, as I was preparing for this panel, I was thinking about this panel a few weeks ago, I was creating my questions to ask about the past, but now actually I must switch the questions into the current situation, right, and to the present. So how the internet helps you, or how is it used by the recent events in your country? If you, as an expert, or if your colleagues as democracy activists use this tool really a lot, does it help you, or are there rather people from abroad who are using it and you are just following the stories online but not putting anything by yourself? How is it in your country?
First, let's give a background about what's going on now in Cairo. Most of the outside world in Europe and the United States and democratic world, they thought that everything has finished after the revolution of January. Actually, many optimistic people in Egypt were thinking in this way, that we're gonna go in a smooth transition period, which is not the case. In Egypt, Egypt had a military coup d'etat 60 years ago, before we were a monarchy under the British occupation. And since this coup d'etat, we had a military rule in Egypt. It had different phases. The recent phase, the liberal phase, it was that the military ruling but not governing, keeping in the behind, while there's a kind of shamocracy, a fake democracy going there, multiple parties competing in the election for having the same results every time. So what happened exactly, that people went against Mubarak and the military came to the power, and we were expecting for the generals of the military is leading the transition. Everybody in Egypt knows that those people, they were the assistants of Mubarak for 20 years at least, but it was a historical moment, and actually we were no choice else. We're not armed, and the revolution, it was peaceful. That's why we were needing a kind of solid power to stand and push Mubarak out. But what happened exactly during the 9 months is that the military, whether because they are very conservative or whether because they are the assistants of Mubarak, they were trying to keep everything as it was, and even they were trying to suffocate the revolution and to came back to what was before. The Egyptians are very peaceful and calm people. They are not revolutionists. This is mainly because of, we have a river and the people are farmers. I mean, this is the historical origin of Egypt. So the people are very calming down, and they are not revolutionists by nature. So we were expecting that the people will be happy with this and sit again under the military rule was nothing. But what happened was crazy. The last week, some of the victims of the revolution, they were sitting in Tahrir Square. They were like less than 100, and the security forces, they came to them and they dealt in a very harsh way with them, in the same way that sparked the revolution in Egypt. The revolution in Egypt, it was on 25th of January, which is the day of police in Egypt, and it was mainly against the brutality of the police. So the problem that on the last week, the police used the same tools, the gases and the violence against the protesters. And here the 50 persons who were sitting in Tahrir actually got some thousand to sit in Tahrir. And after 2 days of violence, the people started to chant directly against the SCAF, the Supreme Council of Armed Forces, who's ruling Egypt now. During this, we're using new media in a very clever way. I was advocating over the last 9 months in everywhere I was visiting. I was advocating that it is not a Facebook revolution or internet revolution. Yes, it is not. However, the internet, it was a very important tool for us. I will talk about what's going on now. I'm thinking about what we're doing with Twitter, for example. After only 1 day, we had a lot of injuries and people killed by the police, and we had a lot of field hospitals in Tahrir Square. For example, we made a hashtag for the Tahrir needs or the hospital needs to organize this. This is totally spontaneous. The democracy movement in Egypt before the revolution and after the revolution is not organized at all. It was a very huge network, loose network of individuals and small groups who made this revolution. But I mean, nobody can claim that it was an organization or organized movement in the theoretical way when talking about a social movement. So we're using Twitter, for example, as our collective mind. I want to make a decision. I've been told that Kamal Ganzouri got appointed as the prime minister, and for example, I don't know who is Kamal Ganzouri, who is this man. So I want to make my mind. What I'm doing, just going to Twitter to see the people sharing information about the man and making my decision. So we're thinking in this way. Of course, the internet, it's the same problem everywhere. The internet is not reaching all the people, but we can consider the group who are using the social networks at the core of the democracy movement. And we're just starting where we're making our minds and making our decisions through the internet, then going out and the people start to come to us. And those who are coming to us, they are mainly online. They don't have Facebook accounts or Twitter accounts, but once they are deciding to join our protest, then it is a revolution. Exactly, this was the case. On 25th of January, almost most of the people who were on the streets, they were the activists. I mean the activists, the internet activists who are having social networks accounts and using such networks for political mobilization and recruitment. Those people went to the streets, and when the offline people joined them, it became a revolution. The difference before that, we were calling for a protest and going to the protest with no offline people who are joining us, then we were beaten and go back home again. The difference every time is the offline people who are joining us. But we're using the video platforms like YouTube as our media tool. The problem that under the military regime since 1950, we had the media. We had only mainstream media who are all the time telling the stories from the official perspective. Most of these years, the media were used for propaganda, whether under the regime before Mubarak or now. Now, of course, more, because when having military rulers, of course, we're having a lot of propaganda using the media. So. The mainstream media, the traditional media, simply it's our enemy. They are not trying even to get the perspective of those who are protesting, and that's why we're using the internet for being our media. From here, I want to say that we cannot consider at all the internet as a tool for a dictator. The internet, we might ask questions about the accessibility or the capacity of the internet to reach the people who are offline. We can ask about if the internet activists are influential enough to get the people to their side, but it couldn't be a tool for the dictator simply because the nature of the internet is the freedom. And we feel that when the oppressive regimes starting to deal with the internet, they are dealing with the internet with the same mentality of the traditional media, and they totally fail. What we're doing now, for example, that the state media all the days during the last week, they are talking about that we're trying to attack I don't know, the Ministry of Interior, and we are thugs and terrorists and all these kinds of accusations by all oppressive regimes in the world. And simply what we're doing is just having videos or photos that proving that we're not doing so, and where protesters asking for demands and were oppressed. This was the case all the time before Mubarak and after Mubarak. When the oppressive regime trying to use the internet, they fail, and we are developing our capacities day after day. It became now very natural for the activists in Egypt to use the internet in a very strategic way without feeling it is a strategic. I mean, we're very skillful in sending messages, opposing the official messages of the state media, telling our stories, recruiting people, organizing ourselves without paying a lot of effort about thinking what we're doing. You know, it is a daily skill. Of course, we got this skill. I cannot claim and say training. It's learning by doing. But with time, we became very skillful in using the internet. However, we're thinking how effective is the internet on the course of the revolution or democracy movement. Myself, I consider it as a tool, just like the printing machine in the French Revolution. It is, it's a development of the cassette tapes on the Iranian Revolution. It's a media tool, and we're using the media tool of our generation, the media tool of our era, in the best way of making use of it for our movement. The internet was totally down on 28th of January. This was the main day of the Egyptian first revolution. We started on 25th of January, but like I told you, we were like 15,000 of activists or something. And on 28th of January, this is the day where all the Egyptians came to the streets, and the police started to try to stop them, and the police got defeated within like 4 hours or something. On this day, the internet was totally down. For a few days before, they tried to use the blockage on the social networks like Facebook and Twitter. They totally failed. Yes, they blocked them already, but I mean, we used our ways and our tools, and all the young people in Egypt, they were reaching the Facebook and Twitter and passing the blockade. And they found no way else unless stopping the internet, just switching off the main cable of the internet in Egypt. And I believe they will not do this again, because when the people found that there is no internet connections and no mobile connections, they decided to go to the street to witness what's going on. So I mean, now they are thinking a lot before having such a decision. What happened in Egypt very quickly during the last 10 years, this is the story of the use of the internet in Egypt. That first, I want to say that the internet started to Egypt in 1992, and the prime minister who were actually very keen to get the internet to Egypt, he's detained now. Of course, they didn't think that we're gonna use the internet for toppling them, but this was the case. Everything started mainly after the Palestinian Intifada in 2001, and the people started to go into solidarity movements with the Palestinians. And this time there was a very important story to tell about the importance of the new media. The people who are in the marches of solidarity with the Palestinian Intifada, they were chanting against Mubarak. And the traditional media, all kinds of press and TV, they weren't allowed to even tell that the people chanting against Mubarak. So the journals, the newspaper, they were stating that while they are covering what's going on for the Palestinian Intifada, they stating that, and the Egyptian people, they were chanting some chants that we cannot tell you about. So what happened after this, 2 years after this, especially after Iraq war, and here this was the start of the use of blogs, mainly in the Middle East, using blogs for political reasons. The bloggers, they were mocking and even insulting Mubarak, and this started to open the space for the traditional media for attacking or criticizing the regime. Actually, this is other strategy of our strategies, and we're using this with the military rulers now. For example, in Egypt, it wasn't easy at all. It was impossible actually to attack a military person or a military leader. What we're doing is just insulting and mocking, and this is start to change the mentality of the people. As long as this blogger can insult the general, the commander of the military, then he's not a god, and we can stand against him. So these are some of our tools. I don't know if I have time or I don't have. Okay,
I would suggest that we.
Okay, on the questions.
We will have some more time at the end, but as I said, we writing the paper, we of course discussed in the institute the two case studies, Belarus and Egypt. That's why I would like to ask Alek, as you were writing the paper, collecting the research results from our experts, what was for you especially fascinating? What was something new for you? Which similarities, differences have you noticed from the two case studies, and of course from that what our two panelists just said? What was new? What was interesting? What would you like to share as your knowledge with the audience? What you found out from the studies?
Thank you very much. So, as you mentioned, indeed, my task was quite specific. It was pulling together the two, I'm not sure whether I'm heard, two stories. And I consider this report or this policy paper mainly important in presenting a certain way of talking about these events. I think it's very important to have neither overly optimistic expectations, which are, I think, very popular in the media, but sort of make it seem like an easy story, but also to have overly negative approaches which sort of limit our ability to make use of these technologies. And I think these reports clearly show that these technologies can be used successfully, because then I think you can switch to thinking, which is not a question, are these good or bad technologies, powerful or weak, but what are the ways of using them in the correct manner. So several things I think are important. First of all, I'm very happy, and this is especially visible in the Egypt case, and Basem, you've already basically described it, that there's a certain long-time perspective to be considered of using these media, and you will see that it takes time, and you're describing it, there is a process of learning among both the narrow group of activism and the society. So one thing, I think it's a very interesting thing to consider. Iryna, you've mentioned that there's a part of the society that's not reached by digital media. It's different in different countries. In Poland, it's still around 50%. I think it's a bit more, from what I remember, both in Belarus and Egypt. Unless you're Netherlands, you have this issue of a non-digital part of the society, and now the question is what to do with it. I think that on one hand, the reports clearly show in the Egyptian case, or ask the question in the Belarusian case, that success depends on a certain linking of online activism and offline activism, of web-savvy activists, the young generation, and traditional activists like workers' movements or more traditional political parties. But I would add to this that from this perspective, I think what's traditionally described as e-inclusion or increase of education of digital skills, and is considered a task from a wholly different sphere, the educational sphere. I think it has a political dimension, because I would like to point out that users of social media, the strength of these social media networks basically depend on the number of users. If you're using on Twitter a certain hashtag, it's a way to mark the messages as belonging to a subject. say in Poland there was recently used the 11 listopada, 11th November tag, mainly by the I think the left-wing protesters against the nationalist protests or marches. If your group includes 10 people, you're probably a very smart little group of activists that coordinates their activities. If you're reaching out to, I don't know, 1,000, it means you're a whole crowd that exchanges information in real time. And I think this is it's a type of civic infrastructure. And what Iryna mentioned, that if indeed today people go online and not towards the TV screens to get messages, then you need those people to have the basic skills. So I think in short term we need to take care of these not connected people. I'm not sure how to do it, whether we need to print in the end still through, I don't know, samizdat, the messages you want to distribute on digital technologies, but I would prefer to reach out with these technologies to people and consider it in some way a pro-democratic activity. So that's one thing I think is important. The other I think important is that, and this is visible, that there is a role for very technologically skilled people. It might be a small group, but they need to exist. And it was an interesting thing in the report. I initially, a bit without thinking, wrote that this is done by NGOs, and one of the people reading the report and commenting in it mentioned that that's actually not the case, and indeed he was right. These are often individuals, and it is a specificity that then you have to think of policy mechanisms or support mechanisms for people who are not structured, are often very independent, but at the same time are doing very important work. And some of the tools that are now commonly used have really been created by very small and even informal groups of people. And the last two more things I would like to mention. I think that part of the problem is that the simple stories are the exciting ones. Internet revolution, Facebook revolution, Twitter revolution, and the real story it's I would say of hidden effects and hidden heroes. And I will come to this when we will talk about the recommendations. But the hidden hero, I would say in a way, is on one hand of course the activists, but on the other it's the technology itself. There was a very nice point made by Professor Lawrence Lessig, who's an American scholar dealing with digital technologies, about the movie Facebook. It was called Social Network. I'm sorry. You may be seen it. It's a story which portrays a brilliant young man creating a wonderful new technology, but he wouldn't do it if the internet wasn't there, right? So when we come to recommendations, a lot of them will concern not just activists, but also the shape of the technology that's available there. So last two things very quickly. I think that when we look at the effects of digital technologies, we sometimes wrongly want to talk in terms of good or bad, success, lack of success. I think part of the effect is about the character of activism, the shape of it. And for instance, when Basem says that it's spontaneous, Twitter communication, sometimes you don't know whether it was successful or not. I actually must say that it's a strange feeling watching the events unfold in Egypt and thinking about the policy paper that was written for the whole time as a basically optimistic story, and suddenly it has to pass a test of a policy paper about a difficult story. I hope it does pass this test. But one thing you can say for sure, that without Twitter you couldn't spontaneously coordinate the setting up of for instance, hospitals in the square, or exchange of information. They might not succeed, or I hope they will, but they're doing it in a different way than before, and that's the change cost. And the last point I would want to make, that I think these tools, we need to remember how to use also in democratic countries. They're not just a pro-democracy tool in countries where activists fight oppressive regimes, but they have uses in democratic life, and I think can extend the scope of activities, and especially fill a gap between, on one hand, conventional politics, considered by a lot of people by now a bit boring, they're not involved in them, and allowing a different alternative than just protest. And I think that's a gap worth considering, how it can be used in democratic societies as well.
Thanks a lot, Alek. Well, technology, a hidden hero, it's not good or bad, it's something in the middle. Rodger, you have this general overview. You work with people not only from Belarus or Egypt, but also with NGOs from the Balkans, for example. So you have, you know how it develops there. Probably you have also some conclusions, what is effective, what from the donor perspective you think it's important to support, what is not so effective, or what could be effective in a long run, because as we just said, it's not like that in 1 week we will see the results. Maybe in 5 years there will be some other results. So please share with us your best practice examples or your conclusions from working with so many NGOs and democracy activists around the world.
Thanks so much. It's interesting to both hear the presentations of activists, the summary of a policy paper by think tankers, and then to digest that a little as a donor about how we really approach decisions on funding these kind of projects, because we're all coming at it in a slightly different angle here. And some of what I'm going to say is going to, I think, repeat a little or confirm what some of the other participants have said. Some of it maybe a little different perspective. But I would start out by saying that from a donor point of view, I think that it's not a problem to be overly optimistic. I can count, after doing this now for 22 years, of course, the internet really didn't exist when I started doing this work. We were providing risographs for underground publishing here in Poland back in those days. But I can count on one hand the number of failures we've had of projects dealing with the internet. And let me just try to explain a little. And I'm not talking about that everywhere we funded we've had a Twitter revolution or something like that. But it's very difficult to find an example where supporting this new technology has actually decreased the efficiency of a group. What we've seen over and over again is that this has added a new dimension to what everybody was already doing. We never approach a proposal as an internet project, or we don't fund the internet, we don't fund social networking. We fund groups that are using this tool. And I think that's what's very important to understand, first of all, that this is a tool. As all of our panelists have said, they've called it many different things. Just in the span of 3 minutes, we've heard new media, online media, social networking. It's all part of the same thing, but virtually every group that we've used, that we've supported, that we've worked with, have increased the efficiency, the outreach, their performance. It hasn't always led to a revolution, but it's certainly done a lot more for all of their work, whether it's a think tank or a youth group, a political party, a trade union, a newspaper, you name it, the internet has helped it. So in this sense, I don't think it's wrong to be overly optimistic. Yes, it hasn't resulted in a revolution everywhere. Yes, there have been setbacks, but I don't think any part of civil society can say that the internet has really reduced their effectiveness, unless we talk about the risograph selling companies or the old way that media was done. But there's still a market for that in places like Belarus. So I would just like us to remember, and what we do every day at NED is to remember that this is a tool. It's not an end in itself. We fund groups doing projects that use the internet, not groups that are studying the internet, or we don't fund the internet. It's very important to understand that. It's very important to understand also that it's just one piece of that technology that so many people have mentioned that are linked together. Nobody has yet said that none of this would work either without the cell phone. I mean, what we do have 100% coverage in virtually every country we're talking about is a cell phone. And somebody reads something on the internet, they call their friends, their family, their other people, who then show up in the square. Not every, as we've already heard, not everybody showing up to protest has read about it over the internet. Without cell phones, without SMS, a lot of this would not nearly be as effective as it is. We noticed at NED just little things that changed the way you work. We used to have a rule that we only paid for the telephone costs of telephones in offices. And people started saying, why won't you fund our cell phone costs? Oh, well, that's your personal conversations. No, no, no. This is what we do as activists, is with a cell phone. And the minute that we started funding cell phone costs of activists out in the field, we saw immediate leaps in productivity and effectiveness and outreach and the things they could do. It's very seldom anymore that we fund telephone costs in offices, because that's not where people like Basem are working. In offices, they're making the rounds. They're on the streets. They're everywhere. So so as a tool, we consider that very important and very successful. I would repeat what's already been said, that for us also that online media is just one part of a much bigger media spectrum. We can't forget that still in so many countries today, in a place like Moldova, that very few people are reading newspapers. Virtually everybody is getting their news still from television, from broadcast media. That the internet, the online media, is only one part of a bigger spectrum. We resisted the impulse at NED to move internet-based projects to a separate category. We still call it independent media, even if it's much more social networking and not as much, shall we say, objective news reporting. But we wanted to make sure that we continue to fund print media, that we continue to fund broadcast media, that we continue to see this just as one piece of a bigger way of informing and reaching out to and reaching people. The final thing that I'd like to focus on is something that's already been alluded to by a number of the panelists, is that it's not the tool itself, but it's the people using them. None of these things work very well if you don't have committed people, if you don't have tech-savvy people, if you don't have people that already know, in a sense, what they're doing, how they want to go about it, and suddenly they're given a tool that just makes it much more possible. We fund civil society groups, and I don't think you're wrong to say it's the NGOs that are doing this, because an individual can invent something, an application or something like that, but it's only when it's utilized by a group and reaches out to broader civil society that we really see the effectiveness of the thousands, the tens of thousands, the millions that we've seen in different countries. So again, we've resisted this idea to have, and it's actually in one of these conclusions, something like a digital democracy program. We fund civil society groups, but we help them receive the resources to be able to do the utmost they can with these tools that we've heard about today. And we've just been stunned by the amount of ways that it can be used. And I mean, I think this is what also is much more interesting, is that it's in a sense easy to call for a revolution on a web page. That's not difficult. But how you use the internet to run a presidential campaign, or how you use it to enforce the accountability of elected officials, or how you use it to get people to come to donate things for political prisoners. In other words, the vast use of that internet has spread way beyond independent media. It's way beyond the term civic organizing or community organizing. It really touches every facet of what we do. And so now when we meet with groups and we hear about what they're doing, whether it's civic education or youth programs or environmental work, and then we also say, then, how are you using new technology to make your job better, and how can we help you do that? And that's what made this last, I would say, you mentioned from 1992, but we really started seeing mainstream proposals in this field in the early 2000s. 1998 in Slovakia was the last sort of revolution I remember that really didn't have much of an internet component. But since then, everything that we do has an internet aspect to it. And it really has been an exciting era, and I'm not negative about it at all. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. I think it's one thing is to know how the landscape in the countries that still needs democracy support is, but the other question is, of course, how to support it. And that was my question that I would like to ask to the panelists now. what, from your experience, what should be done to support democracy via the online media? What can the European Union do? What can the member states do? We heard in the morning Minister Stanowski and his idea, Polish idea of the European Endowment for Democracy, a new tool, a new instrument. Is it possible that somewhere in this instrument the support for the online media could be also a part of it? How should European Union support online media? What should we bear in mind? First, I would ask Alek, because we tried to concentrate on that in our policy paper, and maybe you can just give us some of your conclusions and recommendations exactly from the two case studies you were about.
Thank you very much. So, the key recommendations, I would say the first one, I don't know how much people in this room are believers in those tools. I assume we all here in the panel are maybe more or less cautious, but believers. But I would say from a general policy perspective, it's necessary to include a digital component. It's not, I'm not saying that the program should be reoriented, but I believe that every program, like the planned European Endowment for Democracy or the existing, programs of external support beyond the EU for democracy should include such a component. I assume that in 5 to 10 years this won't even have to be mentioned, because there won't be much alternative to projects that include use of these tools. But for now, I think it has to be mentioned explicitly so that we take care that there is support for that. I really think these tools can change situation in many countries if properly used. The second thing is quite specific. I think that the key part is the security of the activists. Of course, activism, pro-democracy activism, is probably always dangerous. It's as dangerous, or it's, I don't know if as, different kinds of danger to go online into a square where people are being shot, and offline, and go online and use tools that can be constantly monitored. And I think it's it must be a very brave thing to do, to use a tool like Facebook, which is just open to oversight, and it's a commercial company about which basically pro-democratic beliefs maybe can be certain at a given moment, but not in the future. And so I think there's a key role to exist secure tools, and these are being created, and I think the creation of them should be supported. And the third policy might seem maybe very broad, but I think that these cases demonstrate the need for internet to be a technology of freedom and be an open technology. And I think it's things like internet cutoff that happened in Egypt. We might think that was a very typical thing for an authoritarian regime. But there was a case of protest in San Francisco where, albeit locally, but the internet was turned off in the subway system because protesters were planning to use it. In London during the protest, the mayor afterwards thought that maybe in hindsight he should have turned off BlackBerry communication. So there's obviously all around the world these ideas that maybe it's good to have a switch. I think it's a very wrong way to go. So I think one recommendation would be to support all policies that leave the internet and open technology and the technology of freedom.
Thank you. Basem, from your perspective, what is needed right now in Egypt, not only now, but also in 2-3 years from now?
Yes, we're talking about the internet and the new media, but the most important to think about the political commitment of supporting democracy, because we had a case, for example, on Mubarak era, that I've been trained by maybe some American organizations or European organizations on digital security, and somewhere else in US or EU they were training the officers of intelligence who are penetrating or violating my privacy how to do this. So I mean, it's not working. It's very important to think about the whole political situation from democracy, from supporting democracy in the countries, to rethink about some words like terrorism, about security of Europe, and the stability in the Middle East, to rethink about stability in the Middle East. And stability in the Middle East is not keeping the Middle East under authoritarian regime. So it's a very important to think in this way. On the level of the internet itself, I can say that there is 3 levels of support. The technical support by educating and training the activists, not the officers. And the financial support by funding the projects for individuals, for organizations. And here I want to say something between the technical and financial support. Helping more people to be online, this will help for democracy and for a better world in general. Even if it's not political driven, if it's not for supporting democracy directly, if you're having a poor people or people who are living in slum area, it's very important to getting them online, away from making this for democracy or not for democracy, because just support them to be online and I will take care of making them supportive to democracy. And politically, on the level of the political support for freedom of internet, it's very important to push the freedom of internet as a basic right. You know, it was very helpful on January 28th when they cut off the internet, that the whole world got scared about this, and a lot of noise came from the official circles around the world that Egypt made a very big violation. And here they rethought about what they did, and that's why we had internet after 2 or 3 days. It's very important for making the oppressive regimes feeling that it is a very big guilt to cut off the internet. Of course, they are killing us, and it's a big guilt. But I mean, it's good to feel that cutting the internet is a bigger guilt than killing us. I believe that's it. I want to say something on the relation between the new media and the traditional media. Of course, it's extremely important to support the journalists and those who are working, the media person who are working on the newspaper and TVs, because we can never stand with only the new media with no professional traditional media.
Thanks a lot. Iryna, how it is in your case? We have already heard a little bit from you that it's important not to only support the online media, but also the surrounding of the online media, right? But going more into the details, what would you recommend?
Well, first of all, I would follow up on what Basem said, is that it is really important to keep an eye and to keep the internet freedom as much as possible, because in Belarus all the bad laws are in place. They passed the parliament, they're signed by the president against internet or for regulating and controlling internet. They are not being implemented, or at least not to the extent that they can be applied. So it means that a constant attention and also this feeling within the country that it might be too dangerous to go too harsh against internet freedom is restrictive in itself. But the international community and European community should keep an eye on that and really push the authoritarian governments not to cross the line, because they're also very good at misusing and misinterpreting what's happening in the European countries, using examples like in London to say, oh, look, well, they're also controlling and regulating it because it is dangerous, or taking out a piece of legislation in some European country to prove the case that the internet should be regulated on a large scale. So that's very dangerous thing that's happening, and that's really important. I think most of the panelists mentioned. To what already was said, I would add, when planning programs to support online activism, I would call to listen to the activists working on the ground, because they know what they need more or less. Of course we make mistakes, of course we do lots of crazy things, but more or less we know in the environment in which we are working, the threats that we are facing, and the ways how we can work better. So it's important to keep the voice of the activist when planning the support programs. I would not overdo the training, because it seems like if we train everybody and everyone gets online, everything will be fine. I would say that people are actually learning much faster than we think, and I can just give an example of my mom, who is 63, and when she decided to completely boycott the TV because it was impossible for her to hear Belarusian and Russian TV, she quickly learned how to go online. I just showed it once, and then now she's reading all the independent websites to get information, because when somebody needs something, they are learning how to get it. So Training is important, but it's not a panacea, so I would not overdo the training programs. I would also call for more flexibility for the programs when they're being planned, because that's the case of my publication. When we were closed down as a print publication, we were in the middle of the project, which was to support the print publication, and our donor allowed us to switch immediately to a totally new format with no guarantees that we will succeed. And that actually not only saved us, but it created a new precedent in Belarusian media field. And I would also just say one more thing, that, and I think that also was mentioned several times, that what's happening online, especially on the social networks, is people-driven. And it's very important not to spoil what's coming from the heart by showering the money into the field. Financial support is really important, but it's also important to keep the balance of why people do what they do and why they're being active and supporting this activism in a smart way.
Thank you. Rodger, as you are a donor, I wouldn't ask you about what you recommend to the donors, but from your donor perspective, I would say you have an overview what the European Union, what other donors should do to be more effective. I mean, how you could cooperate, or what should the European Union do because you see as a donor that it's needed. So please give us some of your recommendations, not for yourself, but also for other organizations who support democracy and online media.
I think that we've already heard a number of the things that I would recommend. Iryna mentioned flexibility. I mean, we heard already in the earlier part of today's meeting, you know, will the European Endowment for Democracy be a typical EU bureaucratic mess, or will it be more of a flexible, sort of private, quick to work and less bureaucratic instrument? And this is what we would recommend for all donors in terms of, especially when you're trying to work in relatively new fields like digital, like internet technologies. I mean, you really do have to be flexible because things are changing so quickly, so rapidly. You have to be able to move quickly. Again, what was mentioned, the issue of too much money versus not enough money. I mean, we are a believer in small grants, lots of them around the country, rather than big, you know, multi-year, multi-million-dollar programs that often get wasted or just don't happen or go on forever. What's interesting about this field is that the technology is quite cheap in comparison to so many things. The costs have come down. And just as an example, in Belarus, after the crackdown on the 19th, the confiscations, it wasn't a problem for us to replace every computer that the KGB seized, in some cases twice. So, in other words, the costs have come down so much that that getting people cell phones and computers and modems, scanners, these kind of things, is not really an expensive process like it used to be when this was a much more expensive field. So using the money in the right way, I agree with what Iryna said about the training. I mean, we really believe that most of the groups that we're funding are much more advanced than we are in this type of activity, and that our job is just to get them the resources to do what they want to do. It's not, we don't have to necessarily train them in how to do this. They're coming to us and saying, we can do this, we can do that. We just need the resources to do it, and that's what we do. On the other hand, I entirely agree with the issue about security. If one of the disconnects sometimes between the civil society that I was talking about and the people that are really the best in this tech field is that many of us that started out before the internet age, or many of the dissidents, the older, I mean, they have a hard time in learning on how to be safe and secure online, and we have to help them do that. The case of Alek is a perfect example of that. So we do believe when it's asked of us, that we do support the training and the other aspects of helping groups to use this funding. The other thing I would say as a recommendation is that because this technology is universal, and because of what it's used for is almost universal, is that the projects that we do that are cross-border in nature, the sharing of experiences, of best practices, of how to use this in one country is relatively easy to do in another country. And it doesn't mean that of course, everything is applicable. Every country has its own unique conditions and its own, in a sense, unique way that people are using these internet tools, but you can do a lot in terms of sharing how this is done with others. And you know, just the reference earlier to Yevgeny Morozov, I mean, his argument that governments can fight this, I think only really works when you have really rich governments like China or Russia perhaps, that can invest in this, or you have tremendously poor governments where there is no internet, like Cuba and North Korea, or places that just haven't invested in it. But virtually every country in between, you really can do these things. You can do it better than the government or the regime, and you can replicate a lot of this in different places. So those are the recommendations I would make.
Thanks a lot. And now I'm sure there are a lot of questions, so the floor is open for the questions. I think we can have another microphone to give the room. So first and then in the second room.
Thank you. It's on?
Yes, it's on.
Okay, Sonja Stojanovic, Belgrade, Center for Security Policy. I have two questions. One question is, does the internet mobilization actually prevent from centralized structure organization? Because what we're...
Can you speak up? Turn the microphone on.
Okay, thanks. So I'll repeat the question again. The point made by the two activists present here was that there is no one power center behind the mobilization. We know that drill from Otpor back in Serbia, but those of us who were involved, we know that there were people organizing the things. So there were groups. It looked like a network, but it was organized. There were just more centers. And I'm curious if the internet brings to this network structure of the mobilization, or you still have some people pulling the strings and planning the strategy for the whole thing. That's one question. And the other question is, we were discussing just the government versus the good guys. What about the self-organized bad guys? This is, in case of Serbia, we have a very active right-wing groups that are also tax saver. You know, they, for example, our organization gets targeted once a year by Serbian nationalists for, you know, working with a Kosovo partner. Second half of the year by Kosovo nationalists for doing a workshop with the military. So, and both of them are targeting us blindly because, you know, they have these search engines for certain words like NATO, defense reform, whatever. So, have you ever fought a war with the other side, which is not the dictatorship, the government, but also self-organized groups?
Marian Kiksiani from the International Center on Conflict and Negotiation in Tbilisi, Georgia. I would like to ask a question which is kind of similar to the question that the lady in front of me asked before, because we as an organization, we are working on conflict prevention and peace building in the region. And of course for us, internet tools are an extremely important tool to bring together people who actually cannot meet each other in the region because there is no neutral territory. So we're using increasingly Facebook groups, Skype conferencing and other tools. On the other hand side, though, we also see that there is a risk that has not been mentioned by any of the panelists, which is actually like radical groups or people who spread rumors, gossip and stereotypes that actually contribute to heightening of insecurity and tensions in the region. And I would also ask for your recommendations, how you would recommend, what's your experience of dealing with this kind of hate speech and, if I can call it, cyber radicalism. Thank you.
Anaïs Marin, Finnish Institute of International Affairs and Belarus desk, and therefore I would like to thank you, Iryna, for an optimistic view, and it's not that often that we hear them. Yet I would make two caveats. It's more a comment than a question. First, it's about the risk to overestimate the number of people who do have Facebook of Contactie or Twitter account, be it in Russia or in Belarus, actually, because soon in Russia it's going to be more Facebook, Kontakte accounts than the actual population of the country, which, it's just a sign that it's probably not real. And also in the case of Belarus, we know that many KGB people have a Twitter account which allows them to spread disinformation and spy on people. The second element, which I believe one should remind also in the case of Belarus, for the sake of objectivity, is the fact that of course the protesters seemed during the year to be ahead of the government. Yet the adoption of this law in 1 month ago that clearly states, that takes takes stock of what happened with this revolution through social network during the summer. The law criminalizes the organization of unsanctioned mass protests and specifies that the use of internet, is like they really have declared a war on the internet, the authorities. So of course we know they probably won't implement it, but yet the threat is here, and I think we shouldn't underestimate the fact that people may go to prison just for, again, expressing their views online.
They already did, so it's nothing new.
Any more questions?
Jan Piekło, Director of Polish-Ukrainian Cooperation Foundation. One issue related to China. There is such a country, kind of big one, and they censored the internet. It was a famous story with Google. I would like you to comment on the issue of the censorship in the net. It's also connected to the question which was already asked about the radical groups which are online, and they are promoting hate speech and contributing rather to... Oh, for example, we had this very important example from our own backyard. So it was the anniversary of Independence Day in Poland, and online tools were used by both groups, radical leftists and radical right-wingers. So internet is a great tool, but how to make it good for people?
The last question.
Thank you, Luciana Išlova, Europeum and PASOS Prague. Rodger, thank you for the point about the Slovak Revolution in '98 being the last one without internet. I just have to remark that I know at least 2 of my friends who were sophisticated enough that they had email addresses at that time, and they sent emails to their other 5 friends who also had email addresses. It was really cool. I didn't have it to organize anti-chair meetings. But the question. Obviously, the internet is very useful for organizing stuff on the ground. Who goes where, what needs to be set up, etc. But I was wondering, Basem, how much were you using it to get in touch with other revolt or demonstration groups abroad? My perception is that to share experience or discuss how other groups are doing it in other countries, face-to-face meetings are still better, no matter how technologically advanced we are. But I mean, I might be wrong, so I would be really interested in your view on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So maybe this time we'll start with Rodger.
We also funded a few email and internet-related things for that Slovak, but I meant it wasn't driven by that. It was really still driven by the old-fashioned methods. In terms of those face-to-face meetings, it really depends on what you mean face-to-face. I talk on Skype face-to-face, with a video camera with my friends and my partners all over the world. So we do believe in funding a lot of that stuff. Nobody has mentioned Skype yet today is also one of the key tools that these people are using in addition just to cell phones. In terms of the hate speech, the right wing, the cyber radicalism, as a donor, I mean, we're funding projects that combat that. Not to hack those people, but to try to reduce their impact and their outreach and their popularity. But what I can say about in terms of protecting our other partners is that we do fund projects that help them resist hacking, the attacks by whether they're cyber radicals or whether they're governments that are trying to penetrate. In a place like Belarus, where they tried to ban 2 of the websites from being available in government offices or in schools, we were able to work with some people that got around that. The government claims today you can't read those websites in schools, but you can. They don't like to admit when they've been beaten. You can help defend websites, and especially key ones in certain countries. You can't eliminate these attacks entirely, but you can help these people use defensive technology as well as offensive technology, and we try to do that. Finally, I would say the question had something to do with places where I think they don't have internet so much, but the efficiency or the rate of growth of what groups are doing with internet far outstrips that of traditional media. I mean, in a place like Belarus in the last year, since the crackdown, we've seen internet audiences go up 2.5 to 4 times, while newspaper circulations have gone up 10%. So the investment in terms of the output is also very important there. The government wants to try to limit what's being done, but it really can't. And we've just seen the more repression that we've had, the more that people have lost trust in state media and the more audiences for the independent news and websites, information websites we've seen.
Thank you. Alek?
So I think I would just like to comment on that one set of questions with regard to the use of the same tools by groups that we would consider, not pro-democratic or against certain values that we ourselves espouse, and relate that with the question about censorship in China. So I would go back, that's the reason why I try to portray a relatively boring technology as a hero. Because I think that the solution is not to affect the common infrastructure. I don't think it's good that these groups are using these technologies, but I would say there's the whole debate happening today. Basically, it's a choice between 2 values, which are to some extent conflicting. It's freedom and security. And the technology of freedom, that's one point where I didn't agree with Basem when he said that dictators can really well use the internet. They can't use it as a communication technology. I agree it's just alien to a certain mode of communication, but they can use it as a surveillance technology because that's very in line with their institutional genes. And I think we have to be very careful because when I say infrastructure, I mean very general capacity that can be created in a technology or not. And I think there's just a danger that once you set up a certain capability, it can be used for different goals. That's one thing. And the other thing is that the groups, and that's probably a great challenge for these technologies. I think no matter whether they're pro-democracy or anti-democracy, they will, unless globally a certain censorship method is enforced, they will find uses of methods of avoiding it. There was a discussion in Poland about blocking internet, and you might decrease external communication of these groups. They might be harder to reach, but I think internally, and I think that's the greatest strength of the technology, they will still manage to have communications through some tool, no matter what you do. So I think just the price is not worth paying.
Basem.
Okay, first I'm going to talk about connecting those who are abroad. In Egypt, for example, in January, we got a lot of lessons from Tunisian activists. Actually, they were telling us how to fight the Central Security Forces, how to stop their vehicles, how to tolerate the tear gases. So I mean, this is a very important experience. And even even before Tunisian revolution, we got a lot of lessons from Atpur. We got into contacts with them through online tools, and this gave us a lot of experience. The most important on the internet tool, it is universal, and it is a kind of tool for all our generation to stand against every narrow-minded way of thinking of the older generations. Not all, of course, but I mean it's the weapon of our generation. everywhere in the world. Regarding the organization, no, we're not organized like Otpor, nobody controlling. I talked about a very huge, loose network of actors. Those actors, some spots of this, some nodes of this network, it was movements like Paper 6 movement that were trying to have the pattern of Otpor. But we have other 3 or 4 movements, and they weren't influential enough if they are going alone without the other components of the network, the civil society organizations, the individuals. We have a very, very effective bloggers who are just talking as individuals and influencing a lot of people. But again, as a node in this network, not in a hierarchical way. I want to say that we are exactly having the shape of the tool we're using. You know, the internet is a network with some nodes here and there. Exactly, this was our organization on the ground. Regarding the bad guys on the internet, still we don't have this challenge you have in Europe. We have only the bad guys in our countries, in the government. So we're actually, I was in a conference for the NATO a few months ago, and they were talking about the cyber wars and cyber attacks and such challenges. And this was totally, they were talking about controlling the internet for the security. And I was saying, what you're saying? It's we're talking about how to develop freedom. So we don't have the same challenges, but I won't say that the right wings or those who are radical, all the time they are better organized than the liberal ones and the centrists everywhere in the world. And this is not only online. I mean, you will find them organized even offline. Regarding how to deal with them online, I believe that we're gonna answer the same question of freedom that has been answered in Europe 4 centuries ago. The only way to control freedom is giving more freedom. If there is a freedom for the bad guys, then give more freedom and tools for the good guys and train them and help them and support them how to stand against this. I believe blocking the bad guys is not the best way, but raising the capacities of the good guys to stand against them. Yes, that's it.
I think it's a Facebook. Well, I'll start with direct question or comments on Belarus. I did not say that internet audience is the only one that is doing the protest and changes. I would say, or what I was trying to say, is that it's a mix of different media that are available now there, and we are talking about traditional media, new media, cross-border radio and TV. We are talking about different means how people can spread the information and spread the message. What happened after the elections, and it's partly in answer to Alexander's question, how to send this message to people who are not online. After the elections, when there was a need to spread information of what happened on Minsk Square, many people online, those who were online, started putting information together in PDF files and post them on their Facebook or Contact pages, asking the people in Belarus to print out a few copies and put under the doors of their neighbors. And that's an old-fashioned method, but it was combined with the new media and it actually worked. On the election day, there was a crowdsourcing platform in Belarus to track the violation during the election process. And on the election day, when the internet was down, people switched from sending their information testimonies from online forums, which was happening all week before, to sending this information by SMSs. So basically what happened that the platform had all tools available for people to inform and to share this information and to overcome the fear, which actually helped many to get strength inside of themselves to go out in the streets and protest. So it's really a mix, and of course, internet can be also frustrating. On the night of the 19th, when many of Belarusian Twitter people were trying through the hashtag of Belarus or ElectBY to get world's attention to what's happening in our country, well, we were completely beaten up by a hashtag called Justin Biden. So it's just really what you can't really always squeeze into the informational space there with your big issue for yourself, but other big issues out there for other people. To the comment that the government will be employing more restrictive tools, well, of course it will. It did already. But what we observe is that its reaction to what already happened. And if we are trying to be faster, and that's what we are trying to do, then we can actually beat the government on that field. To your question about whether it's organization or networking, I would say that at least in Belarus, it's a combination now. We have organized groups which know how to use technologies and how to mobilize people using those technologies, who have probably strategy or at least some idea of the strategy. We have networks where some things just sparkle out and suddenly become popular and people share and they like it and they join it. There are also opinion leaders like in Egypt, some bloggers whose opinion actually means more than opinion of opposition or pro-governmental politicians sometimes. So I guess this new age gives you this combination of organized forces, networks, and opinion leaders. And now we are talking more about setting trends rather than maybe organizing the movement of the or the protest. As for the hate speech, I guess in Belarus the situation is quite black and white. As for the moment, we are not yet facing this so much. Usually, if it's attack coming, it's coming from the governmental side, or it's hidden, but you can understand that the government or bad guys behind it. But I would also say, well, it's the nature of internet, so we have to be ready that people with some bad ideas will be there as well, and we'll have to deal with them and probably find other ways how to confront them. And I would say that publicity is what they're afraid very often. So those radical groups, at least, or those of bad guys, are always quite often hiding behind nicknames that they're not showing their faces. And what we can try to do is just to impose this publicity on them. It's one of the ways of how to confront that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we see, it's really an online media panel, because as one speaker is speaking, the three others are communicating, and it's great. And I'm really proud of us that we made it in such a way that we feel comfortable with using online media all the time. It's a very difficult task to summarize, so I think I won't summarize so much. Maybe 3 points. First of all, that using the online media, as we hear, it's visible, it's effective. We see the results in a short time, but it's a long-run process, so we should be prepared that the results maybe we can see in a few years. That's why we should be flexible, because it's all learning by doing. We really don't know what will happen in the next weeks, months, years. So flexibility when thinking and supporting online media as democracy tool is extremely important. And of course, the online media are just a tool. There are a lot of other tools to support democracy, and when we really want to support democracy, we should use all the tools, combine them, and support all possible tools and help people to network. And I think the last point is that that's a tool, but only a tool, and people are the most important. And that's why I'm so happy that during the next panel we'll also concentrate on other democracy issues, where the people will be also mentioned, of course, as those who are just fighting for democracy in other countries, and we will focus on how to help them in the European neighborhood policy, in the democratization efforts. So please stay with us. Now we have coffee break, and we will meet in half an hour downstairs for the last session. Thanks a lot.